All right, so you are thinking about buying a house in the Fraser Valley, and today I'm going to be giving you a full guide on how to not overpay for the home that you buy. So getting right into it, we're going to start with looking at comparable sales. And the first thing you want to check is when the property that most closest resembles the property you want to buy sold, how long ago did it sell? In the Fraser Valley right now, home prices are coming down on median about 1% per month, but it depends on the product you're looking at, right? If it's a detached, it's about 1%, townhomes are about 1%, but condos are about 1.5%, right? So let's just say you're looking at a property that is, roughly, let's say the comparable sold for $500,000. 3 months later, well, that would actually be more like, in today's market, $485,000, which would be 3%, because 1% per month, the sale happened 3 months ago. 500,000 times 3% is 15,000. That exact same property would probably sell for 485 in today's market. Then you're going to look at that property in today's market and you're going to say, well, is this property better or worse than the one that I'm buying? What does this one have better that mine doesn't, and vice versa? Next, what you should have your realtor do, because this is happening a lot right now in today's market, is you want to look at those comparable sales and have your realtor call that listing agent before you write the offer and ask if there were any credits on that price. What ends up happening when a sale hits the MLS? I just had this happen on one of my sales, okay? It populated as an $840,000 sale price on the MLS. But the day before subject removal, the buyer negotiated another $13,000 credit off the purchase price because they found water in the crawl space on the inspection report. So the actual sale price for that property was $827,000, not $840,000, but the MLS doesn't look at the addendums. They just take the sale price on the contract. So you might have a property that sells for $500,000, but the actual sale price might be $495 or $490. Okay, so make sure you have your realtor check for the credits on those comparable sales, because there are a lot of them happening right now in this current market. Because it's so slow, there are tons of negotiations taking place after the inspection report comes back. Okay, next, price per floor, not a big concern in this market, but in a hot market, what a listing agent is going to try to do is get an extra $5,000 per floor on a condo building, right? The way that they price new construction is typically $5,000 in every floor that you go up. And usually the first floor will be worth the same as the third floor. The second floor is the cheapest, and the top floor is usually worth $10,000 more or $20,000 more than the second highest floor. So as an example, second floor will be $400,000, 405, 410. Let's say the fifth floor is the highest floor, 420,000, right? Let's say it would actually be from the second floor to the third floor, I believe, is actually plus 10,000. So that the first floor would actually be the same price as the fourth floor. This is in new construction. So on the resale market, listing agents will try to price properties according to that framework. The problem is, in all reality, people really don't care if their unit is on the second floor or the third floor. They care if it's on the top floor or the bottom floor, but very rarely do they care if you're somewhere in the middle. So it's very rare that a third floor condo unit is going to get $5,000 more than the second floor, especially in a market that's falling. The only thing that might happen is if you have two of the exact same floor plan for sale in a building, the buyer is probably going to pick the third floor over the second floor, all things being the same. But in a hot market with very low inventory, you're probably going to get more money for being on a higher floor. It's just in a slow market like today with tons of units to choose from, you're not going to get that premium most of the time. Next thing is corner units. So for example, if it is a townhome complex, and it's probably very similar for condos, roughly the same, you might get an extra 20,000, call it 15 to 30 grand for a unit that's a corner in comparison to one that isn't. Now, it depends on the corner, because some corner units suck. Some corner units aren't true corner units. It might be a corner unit that has nothing else attached to it, but like 6 feet right in front of it is another townhome, and there's no windows along the side of the complex. Sorry, no windows along the side of that townhome. The big benefit with a corner unit is you have windows along that one side of the structure where there would have been another townhome attached, which brings a lot more natural light into the unit, makes it feel bigger, it's way brighter. And then on top of that, depending on the complex, some corner units might back onto a green belt or something nice to look at. So it depends on the complex itself, but I would say $15,000 to $30,000 is pretty standard for a corner unit in a townhome complex, and probably the same for condos, maybe a bit less, maybe $10,000 to $25,000 for a condo, again, depending on what they're looking at and how many windows and how cornery that corner unit really is. Next, again, if you're looking at townhomes, a double car side-by-side garage might fetch an additional $30,000 in comparison to a tandem garage, which when you're parking, it goes one car in front of the other. So they're long and skinny instead of, wide and short, which is the much preferred version of the garage. Now, in a scenario where there are no comps that have sold recently, and this is where a good realtor comes in handy, there are a few ways that you're going to find out what the value of this home is worth, right? So, and you're probably going to do a combination of them. So for example, if I have nothing comparable to my home that's sold anytime soon, what I might do is I might look at other properties in that same area that aren't comparable, but kind of in the same area. And what I'll do is I'll look at the BC assessed value from 2024, and I will gauge where are these properties selling in relation to that assessed value. So if most of the homes in that area are selling 5% below the assessed value, well, it could be somewhat safe to assume that the property I'm looking at is worth 5% less than that assessed value. But again, it depends on so many things. I probably won't just look at that one thing. What I might do to get a confluence of indicators that I am correct about this being worth 5% less than the assessed value is I might go back 2 years in sales and find a comparable that is comparable to this property that we're looking at. And then I'm going to look at what the prices have done. Let's say it's a detached home in Cottonwood, Maple Ridge. I'm going to look at the HPI and see what the prices have done from that date until now. And if it somewhat lines up with the 5% off the assessed value, then we've got two indicators telling us that yes, this is the price for this property. So that's just an idea of a couple things that you can do with no comparable sales. And there are a couple other ways, but those are probably the two easiest ways that usually work depending on the property. Next, I want to talk about how pricing works. Now, there is a misconception out there that a home is worth a price, right? This home is worth $850,000. And that is untrue because market value is always a range. And especially in a market like today that's very illiquid and slow, the range actually widens. The bid-ask spread widens. And if you invest in stocks, you understand what I'm saying. And the reason why there's always a range is because each property is going to be worth a different amount to each different buyer. For an example, my property has a pool. I didn't want a freaking pool. I hate pools. I didn't want to clean it. The wife wanted the pool. So we paid more for the house because it had a pool, right? But to a lot of people, they don't value that pool. Maybe they really like the house, but they don't like the pool. They're gonna be willing to pay less than somebody who likes the house and the pool. Same thing with like a ground floor condo. There might be somebody who really likes the actual condo, but doesn't like how it's on the first floor. Then you have another buyer that likes the condo and loves how it's on the first floor. That buyer is gonna be willing to pay more than the other buyer who doesn't like how it's on the first floor. So in my example, you have the asking price at $1 million. Its value might be $950,000 to $980,000, depending on the buyer that's purchasing it. Okay. The top end of market value is going to be $965,000 to $980,000. If you paid that, I would say you paid a fair price. Okay. Low end of market value is going to be $950,000 to $965,000. If you paid that, I'm going to say you got a good deal. Under $950,000, you got an amazing deal. You got a great deal, super hard to do. A lot of stars have to align for you to pay less than the lower end of market value. Usually the seller has to be in some type of situation for you to get that. If you paid over $980,000, I'm going to say that you overpaid. Now, overpaying isn't the worst thing in the world. I had a client this year that I would say overpaid for a property. But I let them know overpaying is fine so long as you understand that you're overpaying. There was a property that was worth probably $1,030,000 to $1,060,000, and my buyer paid $1,075,000. But here's the thing, the property that they wanted, very few of them get listed every year. They love this place. They had seen everything else that's on the market. This was the place that they wanted. So they overpaid $15,000, right? Now, a lot of people say, well, that's freaking terrible. They overpaid, blah, blah, blah. Listen, the seller wasn't going to let it go for anything less than that. We negotiated for 2 days. That's the bottom line for this guy. And sure, maybe they could have walked, but somebody else was probably going to be willing to pay just as much as my buyers, if not slightly more, because of the way the property was. One of those homes with like character beams with a view and move-in ready and well-maintained and all this stuff, right? In the grand scheme of things, $15,000, a little bit more than 1% of the purchase price, and a market that's doing well, you're going to make that back in a month. So overpaying isn't always the worst thing, but it depends on the situation, how much you want that property, and you should also understand that you're overpaying. Where people get in trouble is where they're overpaying, thinking that they're getting a good deal. That's where you get in big trouble. And I just did a listing evaluation for somebody who paid $500,000 for a property when I thought it was probably worth $430,000 when they bought it. And now they're stuck in that property. They can't sell it. They can't rent it out, and they want to leave. So they're stuck there. So in that situation, you know, had they understood that maybe they were paying $70,000 more than what it was worth, or $50,000 or whatever it was, maybe they wouldn't have bought it. And I'm guessing, I'm going to say they almost guaranteed wouldn't have bought it. So case by case scenario, but if you're trying to get a good deal, as long as you're on the lower end of market value, I would say you're getting a good deal. Anything below that is a great deal. If you're paying on the mid to higher end, you're getting a fair deal for that property. Now, the third thing, building your offer strategy. So the first thing that I'm going to look at is how many times has this property been listed? And what I've found is the seller psychology starts to change around the second price reduction. So it gets listed, it gets reduced again. That right there is usually when the seller is willing to let this property go and they're willing to start working with you. Next thing I'm going to look at is, what did the seller pay for this property? Are they in a large profit or are they in a loss? Now, if they're in a profit, this usually is going to help you get a better deal. But again, it depends on the seller's motivation, right? If this is somebody in their 40s who just wants to leave the country, leave Canada, that is a motivated seller who probably doesn't care about the nickels and dimes and they just want to get the frick out, right? If it's a retiree, retirees usually look at every single dollar that they're getting, and they may be willing to sit on that property until they get their price. So even though they're in a large profit, they may not be willing to give you a deal because they are looking at every $10,000 as $10,000 less that they will have to spend and live their life with after they sell the property, as an example. Now, somebody who's in a loss, again, it depends. You should be able to get a good deal on this, because somebody who's selling in a loss is usually selling because they're worried about something. They're worried about losing their job. They're worried about the payments. They can't make them anymore. They're worried about a mortgage renewal. They're worried about the state of Canada and they want to leave. They're worried about something, and that's why they're selling. Now, the problem with somebody who's selling at a loss is that they need to go through the 5 stages of grief, or the 5 stages of acceptance, right? If they're in denial, you're not going to get a good deal. If they're in anger, they're not going to get a good deal. If they're in bargaining, the stage where one attempts to negotiate with a higher power the circumstances to reserve the loss, you're probably not going to get a good deal. If they're in depression, a period of profound sadness and emotional pain as the weight of the loss is realized, if they're in depression or the back end of bargaining, that's probably where you're going to get your deal. And again, that may not happen until they are months on market, 1, 2, 3 months on market. Even though they're in a loss and need to sell this property, they still have to go through these stages before they can sell it to you at a deal. So if they're selling at a loss, you can get a deal, but understand that it may not happen 7 days on market. It may take time and a couple price reductions. Next, I'm going to look at the title. So on the title, it's going to tell me, are there any liens? Have they paid their strata fees, property taxes, vacancy tax? How many mortgages do they have? If they have more than one mortgage, they're probably in trouble. When did they take out that mortgage, right? If it's a 2021 mortgage with RBC, then I know that mortgage is coming up for renewal next year, and it's probably going from 2% to 4.2%. And that's likely why they're selling, is they're front running that renewal that they know they won't be able to afford. What line of work are they in? If they're a realtor, then I know their income has probably gone down 70%. And the reason why I look at this is like, it's not like this is going to instantaneously give us the best deal ever, but it just helps with the strategy when we come in and write the offer, how aggressive I can be, how not aggressive we can be, etc. And lastly, you should know what you're going to pay before you even write the offer. So as an example, let's go back to this, right? If this is $1 million property, let's try to get it for $940. Okay. That's a great deal. So the first offer in this might be $927,000. I like to use odd numbers. So to the seller, it appears to be a lot more calculated. And there's a reason behind that number. Like why 927? Why did they pick specifically that? And it just seems like more of a serious buyer, where what a lot of the time happens, especially on the listing side, is I will receive an offer for 900 grand flat or 850 flat. Well, right away, I know you're one of two people. Either you're not serious at all. And the problem with that buyer is even if I accept your offer at 900,000, they're instantly going to get buyer's remorse. They're gonna be like, oh, well, what's wrong with it? Why did they just accept it? Why didn't they counter? There's got to be something wrong with the property. And then they're not going to remove subjects one day before subject removal. And it's just going to be a huge waste of time for everybody, right? So either you're going to be unserious writing a $900,000 whole psychological number on that paper, or you're going to be serious. And when I counter you at 990, you're going to instantly come up $40,000 off of that 900 grand. So I don't like to use these whole numbers because in my opinion, it just seems like you're pulling a number out of your ass, right? Why 900? Why not 850? Why not 600 grand, right? So when you choose that 927, it looks like you have a plan. You're firm and serious about the offer. And then when they counter at 990 or 985, instead of coming up $30,000, $40,000 right on that first offer, maybe we come up 10 or 8 or something like that to show like, hey, we're serious about buying the property, but we want to get a good deal, as opposed to writing just anything on that paper and coming up $50,000 right away, or not coming up off your 800 grand, which means, or your 900,000, which means you're probably never a serious buyer to begin with. So I like to start the offer with the end game in mind. Hey, we're trying to land at 940. That means we're coming in at 927. If they counter us the first one, we're going to go up to 935 or 937, right? Maybe we have to go up to 943, something like that. And kind of that's where you want to land. And you're going to pick that first number based off of that, instead of just, writing a random whole psychological number on that paper, which basically just tells a seller that you're picking numbers out of your ass. So that is my guide to getting a deal in the Fraser Valley. And if you would like some help with that, you can book a time to chat with me using my calendar link down below. Otherwise, I just appreciate you for watching. I'm that Agent Kelly. I'm making moves to move you. Peace.